I'm really excited now to introduce the stage this evening, in which the panelists are going to be talking about the Emergent Alliance, data-driven insights to the new normal. Clearly, the pandemic presents a huge range of risks and problems for a wide number of people, but it also presents opportunities. And today, I'm really excited to hand over to the panel to talk about the opportunities that can come from data sharing and open data through the pandemic. If anyone wants to tweet information about the panel, please hit at CogX 2020, and the panel is hosted by the Future of Work Institute, and you can find out more information about the Future of Work Institute at ifow.org. So handing over to Rachel now for what promises to be a very exciting event.
Hi, thank you very much. I'm Rachel Gawley, and I'm the Programme Director for the Emergent Alliance, which is a not-for-profit that is looking at sharing data and sort of answering key questions around economic recovery post-COVID. I'm delighted to introduce Caroline Gorski, Group Director from Rolls-Royce, as she is one of the founding members of the Alliance, and she's going to talk you through the great progress that we've made in a few 6 to 8 weeks. Thank you. Caroline?
Hi. Thanks ever so much. Thank you, Rachel. And hello, everybody. Really nice to have the opportunity to talk to you all. If you could start the slides, please, Director. Thank you. So this really is an opportunity for us to talk about some of the ways in which responding to the challenges we face can create new potential for our organisations. The Emergent Alliance really began back in March of this year. And in actual fact, it was a response to a call out that happened from the UK government, which Rolls-Royce, the organisation that is my employer, responded to. We were asked, along with a number of other manufacturing organisations in the UK, to respond to the challenges we faced as a nation in terms of getting enough ventilators produced to support the NHS. Now, obviously, as a manufacturing and engineering organisation, Rolls-Royce, along with a significant number of other organisations across the UK, jumped straight in, got involved, started to do a lot of very powerful work, trying to understand how to rapidly speed up and provide for a more robust supply chain to deliver ventilators. And the progress that team's made has been amazing. But my job inside of Rolls-Royce is that I run R2 Data Labs, which is Rolls-Royce's data innovation network and catalyst organisation. And we're there partly to help Rolls-Royce transform itself into an industrial technology company. And 2 members of my team came to me on March the 16th, 2020, and said, okay, we've seen our colleagues responding to this demand to try to help put more ventilators forward for the NHS. But what can we do? What can we do as data scientists? What can we do? We work with an abstracted provision of data. We work really hard and have been working across the last 30 years to understand how to spot faint and emergent properties in data, both from a human perspective and from a machine learning perspective, to be able to predict where we start to see potential issues arising in very complex systems across our power generating fleets in multiple industries. But how can we bring that kind of skill and competence to bear in the context of a global pandemic? And what could we do that would actually help? And it didn't take us terribly long. In fact, we probably sprinted around it for about 48 hours before we'd understood that we felt there was a case where we could apply some of that data science, some of that predictive capability, working with emergent data, to be able to start to see some early green shoots of economic recovery coming out of what we knew would be a really challenging economic situation in the context of the pandemic. But one of the things that was obviously true to us and very clear after about 24 hours of thinking about it was there was no way at all Rolls-Royce could do this on our own. We don't have access to the data that would be needed to do a good job. We don't have access to the expertise and the domain knowledge that would be needed to be able to produce analytics that were meaningful. We needed to build a community. We needed to reach out and engage with others. And so over the next 4 weeks, the project that was previously referred to as Emergent, led by Rolls-Royce, became the Emergent Alliance. We reached out to technology companies, to data collaboration experts, to data science teams, to data privacy experts, to people who owned data, and asked them all to join us. We started some early stage draft analytics from our own AI hub in Berlin, looking at detecting and amplifying economic recovery cycles from COVID-19. And we wrangled all sorts of people, lawyers, PR teams, data security teams, remote working challenges, and our own kind of anxieties about operating within the lockdown. And I'm really thrilled that on April 17th, 2020, just 4 weeks after we started with that question from my team, what can we do to help, the Emergent Alliance was launched. And the reason I'm incredibly proud and pleased that we as a group have been able to come together and do this is that, as Rachel's pointed out, the Emergent Alliance is a not-for-profit community which is there to help inform the future decision-making of corporates, small businesses and nation states in response to the challenges we face, particularly from the economic perspective. And we draw on a really diverse collaboration across those categories to help us try to think about where can we see these faint signals of economic recovery and what can we do to help stimulate them and make them happen faster. And that's because ultimately our vision is that we coming together as a pro bono, not-for-profit, open source based collaboration can help everybody to recover together stronger. And it is our vision to continue working to build that independence and creating that safe environment in which we can share data, expertise and resources so that we can help to bring about the new normal in the fastest and best way possible. And the key challenges we address when we're thinking about this are these. We're interested in understanding how we can construct challenge statements, essentially problems that we can bring to our community to then go about solving, that look at the demand for goods and services. What do people need and want, and how is this changing in the context of the pandemic and our responses to it? The labour market. What skills and expertise are required, and where are these skills going to be available now and in the future? The way we work. What are the new working environments? And here is a wonderful example of one of them, and what's the impact of that? It's been really interesting being part of preparing for this and seeing how exhilarating it is to be part of a truly digital conference. It's amazing. I was at CogX physically last year. It's extraordinary to be here in a digital sense this year. It increases inclusivity, which is wonderful, but it is, of course, reliant on all sorts of fragile things like broadband connections. Globalization. What's the impact on globalization, and how is this going to affect the supply chains that many of us operate within? Localization. How is our national economy changing? How at a more regional level might, at sub-national level, might the economies change? And then three kind of cross-cutting themes. One is around mobility, the movement of people and goods. One is around sustainability. Will the changes that we're seeing to the way that we think about ourselves and the way our economic model responds produce a lasting impact on environmental sustainability? And lastly, resilience. How should the world prepare potentially for the next such crisis? What can we learn from this one? So how does it work? Well, fundamentally, it works on the model that many of you would be incredibly familiar with if you're working in an agile methodology today. We start by data sharing, trying to bring together data that has perhaps never before been lined up against each other in a trusted environment worked on with integrity by the members of the Alliance. We work to challenge statements to specific problems that identify real use cases that have an application in the real world. And we do that across our community to understand how we can help support economic recovery. And then we publish our outcomes openly, open source, with meaningful insights so that we can take action off the back of them. And so today it's really wonderful that for this panel we have two of our sponsors of our challenge statements that are currently live and running within the Alliance joining us on the panel for the discussion. The first is our challenge sponsor for our rail challenge, which looks at what's the positive economic impact from getting back to normalized passenger rail services, and how can any economic benefits that we might see be compared to any increased risk. And then secondly, our sponsor, and that challenge is sponsored by the RSSB, the Rail Safety and Standards Board. I hope I've got that the right way round, Ali. But anyway, I'm sure you'll correct me later. And then the second is our Aviation Challenge, which is sponsored by Satavia, which looks at the fact that obviously aviation underpins the global economy, but air travel has been a significant vector for the transmission of COVID-19. So how can we develop reliable monitoring and forecasting so that we minimize the health risk to the global population whilst supporting the reactivation of the aviation industry? So lastly, I guess I want to just draw some thoughts and attention, which we might come to across the panel, to think about what could the Emergent Alliance be if as we continue to evolve it and move it forward. It works because we are in an extraordinary time. It works because that extraordinary time allows us to collaborate across boundaries that we would not normally have perhaps collaborated across. It allows us to put aside commercial considerations. It allows us to work pro bono, to work on a donation basis at an extraordinary speed. We have more than 150 organizations in the pipeline joining or about to join the Emergent Alliance. So that's an extraordinary capability to have built in the space of what is about 8 weeks. We have been innovating collectively as a group at an extraordinary speed. And the challenge that we face globally and economically allows us to take risks and to be bold and to have agility that perhaps wouldn't have been the case 3 months ago. We are all working in new ways. We are all communicating and prioritizing alongside our day jobs. The Emergent Alliance is a donation-led activity. All of us have our regular day jobs at the same time. And so we really are pushing the volunteering spirit absolutely to the max and then some. And we do that with openness, honesty, ambition, and passion. And I think those are really important characteristics. So that is our vision: to recover together stronger. We genuinely believe that the Emergent Alliance is building a new way to help us make better decisions for all of our futures. And we're really excited to share some of our early stage progress with you. Thank you very much. If you could end the slideshow now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Caroline. That was great. I think I have to sort of reiterate that that in the space of 8 weeks that we have made so much momentum, got operational, and just to remind everyone that we all do have day jobs and this is voluntary and it's a not-for-profit. So I think it's just great to be program director, something that so many people are committed to. I've got a great panel here as well. As Caroline mentioned, that we have Adam Durant, CEO of Satavia, who's leading the Aviation Challenge. We have Ali Chigingi, Director of System Safety and Health at RSSB. And I'm also delighted to be joined by William Hobbs, Chief Investment Officer at Barclays UK. And I suppose I kind of want to kick off the discussion with all of us, basically because I want to lead with you, William, because I suppose you're the person outside the Alliance looking in. And I really want to ask you that, you know, we've brought all these corporations together to collaborate around economic recovery. What would be your priority areas for us to, as a collective, to focus on? And I'm really thinking about the sort of tough nuts to crack that individually we would not be able to address or challenge or question or solve, but together we could focus on. So what would you want us as a collective to be working on around economic recovery?
Big question, and Rachel, you're right. I mean, it's a really exciting time to get this done in many ways, and I know it sounds strange to talk about times, as tragic as these, as exciting. But what does come with crises are unique opportunities to make big strides forward. And a good example of this is Europe at the moment. You know, look how long, the idea of kind of mutually issued or mutually backed debt has taken them to get to this stage. And suddenly, in a matter of weeks, you've taken this huge potential leap forward, the kind of Hamiltonian moment that the US took back in the 18th century. So it is a great opportunity to really forge alliances. There's loads of things that I sort of personally would love. I mean, one of the things that we were talking about earlier, which I think is interesting, is, the OECD was among those who've talked about, the global taxation, corporate taxation regime, really dating back to the 1920s, and it's in desperate need of updating. And what we really need as we face, because there is a huge amount of government debt that's been accrued in necessarily fighting this crisis. Now, we've got to think very long and hard about how we not pay all that back, but certainly manage that debt load in the future. Now, part of that has got to be, in my opinion, a more equitably shared or more modern way of sharing out tax revenues potentially. So that's one area, but there are loads, employment law, the social safety net, all these kind of things. It's time for big steps forward, and the environment, apart from anything else. And these are all things that the Emergent Alliance can really do stuff for.
Yeah, do you think that these things should and would have been happening, but it's just escalating the timescale? That the fact is that we could have done these things before, but now is the time.
It's very difficult, isn't it? And I think when people look at issues like climate change, which everyone understands are kind of serious binding hurdles for the future, or barriers to the sort of future prosperity and well-being of the planet, and yet it's so difficult to get agreement now on something that seems like a problem that is on another shore, and we're much better at dealing with stuff when it's on our shores. Well, now we have quite a nice case study in many ways about what life could look like in a much more constrained environment, and so I think it's a great time to kind of use these very kind of vivid illustrations of what life could look like to force change.
Yeah, no, I think so. I think now is the time. So I suppose I want to open that up to the other people who joined and are volunteering their time. Why did you join? What are you getting out of it? How will that help the wider society and community? So open that up to the floor there, Ali or Adam.
Well, okay. Thank you. I absolutely agree with what's been said. In terms of what's in it for RSSB, we represented the railway industry. We're a member organisation that really has membership right across the railway system, from infrastructure managers, train operators, freight operators, etc. What we hope to try and achieve through the alliance is better informed decisions really to help enable policymakers strike the right balance between getting railways back up and running and contributing to the growth economic activity of the UK versus the infection risks, as Caroline described earlier on, from encouraging more passengers onto the network. We know that potentially having reduced social distancing parameters around the use of the railways could potentially result in a higher risk from COVID-19 infection. However, we also know that rail makes an incredible contribution as one of the key sectors to economic growth and economic activity, and it's really trying to draw a fine balance between those and help decision makers really make as well informed a decision about really getting back to some level of activity on the railway, which is optimal and feasible. Currently, the social distancing requirements are a significant constraint on the viability of operations, and what we need is really where we can go without increasing risk, but at the same time ensuring that we get more capacity onto the network.
Yeah, I think that the idea is to be able to answer that fully. That's where we rely on the Alliance members to sort of come together and sort of help provide data around that. And then I suppose the same question to you, Adam. I know we've heard from Caroline that the original call to action that was with Rolls-Royce, but Adam, you signed up very early on as well around the Aviation Challenge. Do you want to sort of give the why for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're a software and analytics company based in Cambridge, and usually we offer data on what aircraft are flying through, things like dust and air pollution, and we help big manufacturers make better decisions around maintenance. We've got a group of data scientists, and as aviation was grinding to a halt, we started helping initiatives like Ventilator Challenge UK, so we gave some advice on ventilators requirements. And really, we want to help the industry get back on its feet and ultimately become successful again. So our motivation is really to help with that process, to provide data that enables the best decisions to be made. So everything from how do we get aviation, how do we get aircraft flying again, so maintenance considerations, through to predicting passenger demand, looking at what's happening with the pandemic, and ultimately making predictions about how the economy is going to recover. And so that kind of leads to some interesting questions around things like, will there be the same demand for aviation after this? Because we've all got very used to working from home now, so remote working is becoming normal. Conferences like this one are being done virtually. So what is going to happen next? And it's not something that we can answer very quickly. So Emergent Alliance brings together some of the best thinkers in the world, all of the available data that we can imagine. And then through a series of challenges and challenge statements, we bring all that together and hopefully offer some useful insight back.
No, I think that sums it up perfectly. Yeah, we're getting some questions through about the operation of Alliance, and I think we'll save those more to the end. That's to keep you tuned in. But I kind of want to lead more around the data, because that's what we keep talking about. So we're now in a world that has drastically changed from every aspect of life. Like Caroline, you touched on this, that, you know, how we socialize, our family, education, how we work, everything we do about our lives. Like, it's not just the outward facing stuff. So what kind of impact is this on the economy? But how do we really get that tangible human side of data out? You know, how we're all living differently. How would we go about finding that data? And how do we gain that understanding of how people as humans are behaving? So I think that was addressing that to you, Caroline, because I think that might be your sweet spot.
Yeah, sure. So and this is one of the things that I'm most excited about with the kind of proposition, the concept of the Emergent Alliance, because I've worked in and alongside big data for a long time. My roles previous to my job in Rolls-Royce have included working with the big mobile telephony businesses, and also working to support kind of innovation from a technology perspective through the Catapult network. And one of the things that is very interesting, and I guess I draw attention just to illustrate the point to the snafu that's happened in the last 2 or 3 days with the release of the employment statistics in the US, where a set of employment statistics were released which completely confounded the projections of the economists, because they were multiple percentage points higher than the economists were expecting. And then within, I think, 24 hours, a correction was released by the Office of Labour to say that there had actually been an error in calculating the statistics, and they were in fact closer to the position that the economists had expected, and significantly lower than the kind of good news story, still going up, but lower than the good news story that had been announced by the White House. And part of the reason for that gap and that problem and the fact that those errors occurred is because the way that the Department of Labour gathers those statistics is they make thousands and thousands of phone calls, and those thousands of phone calls are following a script. And one of the answers in the script about why aren't you working or why are you at home is other. And so before the pandemic, you know, other was a small box that could probably be well explained, and now other is a huge box that isn't well explained at all, and in which lots of people who are actually technically not unemployed, they may be unemployed, but they have been told to wait for their jobs to come back to, so they're effectively furloughed, but perhaps don't have the same furlough support schemes that we have here in the UK. Those people are putting themselves in the other category because they're not going to work, but technically they kind of shouldn't really be counting in the unemployment figures either. They certainly shouldn't be counting in the new jobs created figures, because they haven't got new jobs created. They've just gone back to the jobs that they did have before, that they had to stop being in because they were asked to go home and not work. And so that for me is kind of a really classic example of how our ability to think about the world in which we operate, particularly from an economic modelling and forecasting perspective, hasn't perhaps been able to keep up with the realities of the world in which we live, because collating the kind of customer sentiment, consumer sentiment information from social media, Google search information for people who are looking for, the details of what are my rights if I've been asked to be, to stay home for a period of time, understanding searches on, how do I juggle homeschooling with needing to do my job remotely, looking at the number of Zoom downloads. All of those pieces of information, informal, if you like, information, which perhaps wouldn't have appeared in the way that we think about our economies when we're thinking about traditional economic modelling, those are all incredibly powerful, not to give the answer, but to help contextualise what is otherwise an incredibly opaque set of data to be thinking about.
Yeah, I have to concur, because I was sitting on some of the challenge and seeing that the gaps about how do we fill these gaps, how do we get the data that we might not have been asking the right questions before for the world that we now live in. And I think through having everyone together that we can start that sort of, mind of collaboration and actually be able to address some of those and fill in the gaps or use our knowledge and understanding. So I think that's something that really fascinates me, that how quickly we're having to move around that and make sure that we're still robust and everything else. So it brings me into, suppose, for the wider to say around sort of privacy. How can we ensure that we are respectful of privacy concerns, and sort of for the corporations, but also for people? So what are we doing as an alliance around that then?
So from the very beginning, we recognised that there was the possibility. To be honest with you, a significant amount of the data that we work with is not private data. Certainly, none of the data we work with is private data, but most of the data is not personally identifiable either. But we did start from the very beginning with two considerations in mind. One was, if we were ever to be able to work safely and correctly and considerately and ethically with personally identifiable data, then we needed to have a member or a series of members in the alliance who could really help us to make sure we were handling that data correctly and that we had very strong anonymization capability. And so one of the very first members of the alliance is an organization called Truata, who are specialist in taking already anonymized data and re-anonymizing it, so that even the original producer of that data isn't able to reverse engineer it out and identify any personal information. So that Truata is available to all of the members of the alliance if the data set that they are contributing into the alliance is in any way a personal data set, even if it, as it should have already been, has been completely anonymized. It can be re-anonymized through Truata's systems to make it really, really watertight. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing that we took on board when we first started thinking about how who we would reach out to be the initial members of the alliance was, well, what happens when you join the Emergent Alliance? We ask you to sign our letter of intent as a minimum signal that you want to participate and that you're bought into the way that we think and the way that we're trying to do things. And that letter of intent makes it very clear that we are interested in sharing data in a public, open way, and that we are going to be publishing the outcomes of the data and the source code for products that we produce as the Alliance on an open source model. But we do recognize that there may be some categories of data, particularly, for example, financial services data, or information perhaps that is personally or has the capacity to identify individuals, where that data is just too sensitive to be shared in the public domain. And so we also partnered with a number of organizations, including the Leeds Institute for Data Analytics, who have an ISO approved secured data sharing environment that members who perhaps have sensitive data sets where they cannot share their raw data in a public context will be able to work on those data sets and then publish the outcomes in the public domain, rather than perhaps publishing the whole data set in the public domain. So in constructing the Alliance, we worked really hard, firstly, to make sure that we have the capacity to completely protect personal information, both anonymized initially and then re-anonymized. But also, if there are data sets that are too sensitive to work with in a public context, then we have the provision to work with them privately.
Yeah, I think that's summed up really well, and I think it was baked in at the start. That was kind of like the founding principles. So I think that's very key that for us that we have these founding principles. I've just a few questions coming through that around joining the Alliance and challenge statements, and you touched on it there, Caroline. To join up the Alliance, it's simple. You commit to a statement of intent that you will volunteer or collaborate with us, and you can contribute, and that's actually how you can offer up challenge statements. We obviously go through a process of rigorously looking through the challenge statements and getting it something that we can answer. So if anybody wants to sign up, check out the emergentalliance.org website and you can sign up there or contact one of us afterwards. I'm sure you can find us on all the social medias and LinkedIn as well. So I think that those are the questions coming through. So I want to address that. It's very easy to sign up, commit, attend, and actually chat to one of the members. I kind of, William, you've been quiet over there, and I think that I want to take advantage of having an economist in the room and sort of give you the really difficult questions. Now, basically, is this an opportunity, right, for us to reset regarding work and the economy? You know, is there a positive change to not just the economy, but the future of work, of how we work or how we upskill or the jobs we have, the things that we do? Is this that kind of one of those turning points that we'll look back on and say, you know, there's an opportunity here to do something better, different and positive? So that's my...
Rachel, this is a huge topic, as I'm sure you can imagine, but there's a number of aspects that are quite interesting at the moment. And one is the different way that European businesses have handled, or European institutions have handled this versus US institutions. So in the US, you know, you've obviously got this famously flexible and agile economy that's very good at kind of mobilizing to make totally new products or kind of new innovations. And what it means is that labor force is very easy to hire and fire in the US. So what it means is that, you know, if new products don't work, then you can very quickly offload labor, and labor is re-assimilated into the bit that it's most useful. Now, in Europe, obviously, we tend to have a much less flexible labor market system. Now, in this crisis, if you look at it, the incredible thing that's happened in the US is an incredibly awful thing that's happened in the US is you've gone from the lowest unemployment rate since the 1960s to a 14% unemployment rate. And you know, Caroline was just talking about this, roughly a 14% unemployment rate. Now, if you think about 1929 and the Great Depression, it took about 24 months for the US to reach a 14% unemployment rate. That happened in 2 months. So you've had these millions of people suddenly laid off. You've got 40% of people earning under $40,000 a year unemployed at the moment, or as at pre the last unemployment report. Now, in Europe, it's slightly different. So we've absorbed many workers into the furlough scheme. So you've seen continental European unemployment stay pretty stable over this time. Now, out of this crisis, this is just one aspect. Which system will be perceived to be better? Because if you think one of the big impacts of this crisis will be, one suspects, that consumers are going to want to save more of their post-tax income. That, you know, because of something called the paradox of thrift, that should mean slower economic growth. Now, will that effect be larger in the US, where that very vivid rainy day is now, you know, much more vivid because I've had an experience of being out of work, or will it be better managed in Europe as a result because actually the employees have had a slightly better experience during this time? And it all goes to, you know, the real feeling that I have right now, I have to say, is about you need to provide, because another sort of impact from this crisis on the labor force is likely to be the fact that people will be more reluctant to change jobs. They will feel they're more risk averse to changing jobs. That is bad, tends to be bad for productivity. A more inflexible labor market means bad productivity. So all of this, to me, I have to say, it argues, and I'm giving away my personal position, this should not be perceived as a Barclays position, but a much wider social safety net. You know, this universal basic income or those kinds of schemes that provide a catch-all payment, that is what's necessary at the moment to really unleash the kind of forces of the fourth industrial revolution that we're all talking about. It's going to be very hard for the economy to fully adopt all the amazing innovations that are coming out if, you know, its labor market and it's, you know, it's going to create such large labor market difficulties. And all technological revolutions, they all come with big unemployment in a sense, but the key is to try and find ways to redistribute those workers to where they're going to be most effectively used. And that is the job of the social safety net. And I think at the moment, the social safety net is being found wanting in many economies. And that's something that's a really kind of a great opportunity to rethink how we do it for the next decade.
Yeah, I think I have to hark back because I kind of thought that this was an opportunity for lots of people to rethink what they're doing, upskill, move into different careers. But there seems to be this holding firm in current positions. So I thought maybe furloughing people might think broader. But I think you touched on maybe the rationale of why, that the idea is this inflexibility and sort of how do we unlock that? I think would become quite key sort of for us going forward. A few more questions coming in. I just want to answer them. This is not just for large companies. To get momentum, there's a lot of large companies behind it, but individuals are signing up, startups, SMEs across the board, other not-for-profits. Anybody can really get involved if you've got the intention to collaborate with us and to serve something up. Yes, asking
also,
about...
Sorry, Rachel, but it's also just harking back to William's point. Yeah. It's also a great opportunity if you are furloughed and you would like to volunteer for something interesting and you have the right skills. We have a significant number of furloughed volunteers in our base who, you know, are participating in it as a voluntary activity. So, you know, it's actually helping some of that flexibility to become a learned experience as well.
Yes, yeah, I think that's it. It's like the opportunity to sort of, it's really good to see people trying different things. I think the other question coming in there is just, we seem to have a UK focus, and so I wanted to spell that. It's largely focused, was originally UK, but due to the natural sort of demographic of some of the companies involved, we are actually quite global, and we're looking at basically in America, New Zealand, and sort of in Germany. So we are actually looking sort of at this global approach, and what can we learn from other countries as well, because there's lots of different data sets. What we're finding is that, as you can imagine, data sets are different around the world. So how do we marry those in a good way? So there's a question to you directly, Caroline. So comments, is the Alliance looking at defining work in an equitable way between employees, self-employed and subcontractors? So I'm not sure what they're actually trying to allude to there. So you might need a follow-up around that one then.
Well, I guess no, I'm not sure either, but I guess we don't yet have a challenge statement that asks how is this new form of work, this new digital form of work, being parceled out between employees, the self-employed and subcontractors. I think it's a great idea. If there's someone who would like to sponsor a challenge statement around that kind of a question, I think it would be a really interesting area to explore, certainly.
Yeah.
In terms of Rachel, in terms of the rail challenge, I mean, what we do know based on previous discussions is that we're not going to go to a world where we're going to get crush-loaded trains with the sorts of problems I think everyday commutes presented people near 3 months ago. That's going to be some way off, if ever. We'll be returning to that normality. So as part of the rail challenge, what we are looking at is in looking at the relaxation of social distancing, what are those parts of the sort of workforce, the labour force, that we must get back into their workplaces through the daily commute, whilst at the same time easing social distancing requirements to some extent. So there will be an element of looking at those particular parts of the labour force that are must in terms of returning back to their places of work, and those who can continue to work from home, and still ensuring that railways can operate in a more feasible and viable way than they are at the moment. Currently, at the moment, we have our capacity is somewhere in the region of about 15 to 20%, and that really is not a viable way of carrying on.
Yeah, no. Thank you very much. I'm trying to keep an eye on all the questions coming through. So I've noted we're sort of coming to the last 5 minutes or so. So there's a couple of key questions I want to go around. Everyone's sort of coming from here, and one of the questions is that sort of what is the longer term plan for the Alliance, beyond COVID? And I think originally that we were sprinting around the COVID challenge, and then what we have realized that there is something here, that the collaborating, that bringing people together around data sharing, answering questions, volunteering in this independent way outside our normal business as usual is powerful, and not just for COVID. So I think we have to look at that longer term strategy. If we have all these people willing to sort of commit, how can we be more resilient going forward? So I think that's something that we now have realized, that the strength in what we're doing, that we have to look at longer term beyond COVID. And I suppose that leads my question into sort of for everyone really, that is this changing how we work? That the idea is the new normal post-COVID that we collaborate together more and share data more. Do you think this will promote a new, I see Caroline smiling, but I want to ask this to everyone, because my job as program director, which is difficult sometimes, is sort of encouraging people to collaborate well and widely, and that's giving something, that you will get something back, but it's more that society gets something back. And I think that's where we're edging towards. And it's really amazing to see that happen live for me, but I'm kind of hoping it sticks. So maybe you can give me a little bit more hope here if you want to answer that appropriately. I can see Adam. What's your thoughts around that? Because you're a data-driven company. What's your thoughts on sharing more widely?
Yeah, it's great question. So we very naturally like to collaborate, and quite a lot of our have come from academia, for example. So this is the core of what people do. And then we've had really, positive engagement across industry through Emergent Alliance. And so I think it's critical that we find a way to collaborate. We're going to come out stronger if we can find a way to do that. And it might require a rethink from some of the corporates about, collaboration versus competition. So I think ultimately, if we can get past that, we'll all benefit more than trying to protect IP, which is done in a typical corporate environment. So yeah, I hope we see more collaboration. I think it will get us through stronger, and we'll make the right decisions as a result of doing that.
Thank you, Adam. Any other thoughts on that, or William? Do you think that on sort of the outside looking in, that we're trying to be too positive about it? Is this going to happen? Is this going to be changed for the good? Like, will this stick?
No, I don't think being too positive at all. I think it's a great time to be thinking about global collaboration and these kind of things, because these kind of issues are not solvable on your own, I'm afraid. This requires governments, companies to get together, and really there are huge problems that we need to overcome, and they cannot be done on a nationalist or on a basis that only focuses on competition. I totally agree with Adam's point there.
That's great. So
I'll just make one short point. So Paul Connell, who is part of one of the founding members of the Alliance, and who comes from the Open Data Institute Leeds, he, for a little while we were sprinting around the concept, he called us the Rebel Alliance. I've been trying to do something similar to this for decades, and I'm so pleased and excited at what we've been able to achieve in just 8 weeks, 10 weeks, whatever it's been. I genuinely believe that collaboration is the way that you solve the world's problems. So that seems like a pretty grand statement, but I would love us to carry on being able to make a run at that.
Yeah, and to be fair, I think that's probably the sentiment I really want to end on, Caroline. I know we're going to be over in the sort of the breakout area for Q&A, but I think that sums up that why, on top of pretty hectic day jobs, given the current climate, that we're all volunteering above and beyond and getting involved, because we genuinely do believe that collaboration is the way forward. And I suppose that's my call to action, that if you think there's something that you can give, or this is something that you're interested in, or have a challenge statement or anything, feel free to reach out to any one of us or the Emergent Alliance and get involved. But we would love to carry the conversation on in the breakout area. So I would just like to take this opportunity to thank my colleagues in the Emergent Alliance, Caroline, Ali, and Adam. We've pretty much become work colleagues at this point, even though we're volunteering. So, and then also William for providing that kind of outsider point of view, the economist point of view, and taking time out of his busy schedule to really chat to us and sort of push the agenda of what we're trying to do. So thank you very much. And thank you for listening, everybody. And we will be heading over to the breakout area. So thank you.
Thanks.
Want access to more CogX videos? Subscribe now for free at cogx.co.